Hi, I'm Jim.
And I'm David.
And this is the Practical Guitarist Podcast.
The podcast for people who eat, sleep, and breathe guitar. Hi, Jim.
Hi, David. I thought I saw a bird.
I didn't even count you off that time.
You didn't?
No.
You just brought the bird right in.
Hey, Jim, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Are you a regular listener? Why not? Subscribe to the Practical Guitarist using our chosen podcast app. Take the time to put in a review at the service where you found our podcast, like iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, or Google Play. Get involved. Find our Facebook group at facebook.com/group/practicalguitarist. You can also find us on Twitter as @practicalguitarist. If you're interested in supporting the show, we have launched a Threadless store at practicalguitaristpodcast.threadless.com. If you'd like to donate money to the show, there's always Patreon. Our Patreon is available at patreon.com/practicalguitarist. And I'm sure Jim will have some exclusive content where he's tweaking his nipples on my screen right now. If you'd like to reach out to us directly, you can do so at questions@practicalguitarist.com. Practicalguitarist.com.
Trying to get you to laugh.
I had a giant smile on my face through that entire thing. And it was not because you were tweaking your nipples. It was because I was going to embarrass you for tweaking your nipples.
Yeah, that was very much so. All right.
So last episode, we talked about
previous episode.
We're not in season 2 yet.
The Practical Guitarist.
Last episode we talked about Richie fucking Blackmore and Yngwie fucking Malmsteen. The F expletive is like a title for these gentlemen.
Yes.
So what this brought up an interesting discussion between Jim and I outside the show where we talked about supergroups.
Supergroups.
Yeah, are you familiar with this terminology? If you're not, a supergroup is a group of people that come together from other musical backgrounds to form a musical collective that produces usually 1 to 2 albums and then collapses.
Usually.
And many of these albums are good and timeless. Many of them are fraught with turmoil. Oftentimes these supergroups happen more than once. So they get together and then they break up and then they get back together. In some cases, they spawn other supergroups where, all the members actually kick somebody out and then call themselves something different. Some
supergroups are just members of another group with another person.
Yes. That is in fact the case. I would recommend if you're listening to this show and you are at a computer, you can follow along with our list of supergroups via Wikipedia.
Yes.
I will put it in the show notes as well, but they have a list, which is fairly comprehensive, of by year, the supergroups that happen. And dating back to, I believe the first ones they list are in 1965.
And surprisingly enough, as you said before, one of the first supergroups was Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young.
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young was the first supergroup. And I don't recall they list it here, so I can go through them. But I do know where everybody came from.
I know that Stephen Stills came from, Buffalo Springfield?
Yeah, he was in Buffalo Springfield. David Crosby was in the Byrds.
Graham
Nash was from the Hollies. They were all brought together by Mama Cass, right?
Yep.
And then Neil Young was brought in later. So actually their first record was Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And they didn't bring in Neil Young until 1969, and then he quit and rejoined the group sporadically for years.
Yeah, he pretty much quit the album after that, right? He was pretty much gone right after that.
And actually even funnier, their drummer was the guy from the Turtles. So technically, and he was never truly like a named member of the band. He was from another group. So they're the first. So actually, they're not the first. The first successful and really chart-topping supergroup was actually probably Cream.
Really? They beat Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young?
1966.
Wow. Yeah, I guess they did.
So it had Eric Clapton from the Yardbirds and John Mayall and the Blues Breakers, and they had Jack Bruce from the Graham Bond Organization. I always say it wrong. Graham Bond Organization. And Manfred Mann, and then Ginger Baker, who is also from the Graham Bond Organization. So that's a classic case of they already did this other band, So now, so they decided that they were going to.
Well, I would argue that the Yardbirds would have been a supergroup of a type. Because,
yeah, but I think the Yardbirds. So to qualify as a supergroup, all your members have to come from some sort of background.
So we could have a completely different discussion of what other groups like Toto and Little River Band.
Oh, Toto is absolutely a supergroup, and I guarantee you they're on this list. Absolutely a supergroup. Because those guys maybe didn't have other bands before, but they were well known. They were session players. So like right now, the session players who are hot right now, you probably don't know their names yet.
Right.
You'll know them in 5 years when they do something else.
Right.
And that was not the case with the guys in Toto. Like people knew who Luke Lather was when he was
but he was only, what was he, 20 when he started Toto?
Yeah,
he's one of the founding members.
He might be a little older than that because he's probably in his 50s or 60s now.
But not by much. When you think about it,
it might surprise you how old he actually is.
I think he was 16 when he started doing that stuff. But let's start with the beginning. So we had Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young,
right?
And of course, the guitar playing from that was really identifiable by the fact that one of their contemporaries was Joni Mitchell. Joni Mitchell, if you've ever played any of Joni Mitchell stuff, which I recommend if you have a chance.
If you really want to try to do something fucking insane, try some of her tunes. You will learn new chords. I guarantee it.
And you will learn how to retune your guitar 100 times over.
Yes.
Let me tell you something. That was a woman who I don't think she did the same.
Well, you know who was in her band, right?
Twice.
Do you know who was in her band?
No.
Robin Ford.
Oh, geez. Well, that kind of explains it.
Among others, but he was in her touring band at one point.
I'm sure she was doing those tunings just to keep up with his style of playing.
She was probably just trying to slow him down.
She brought that alternate tuning to not so much Nash, because Nash was or Stills. Stephen Stills was her boyfriend at the time, I believe. At least that "Love the One You're With" type.
If I recall.
He was a bass player, if I remember right, for them and for Buffalo Springfield. But she brought that alternate tuning thing to what's his name that came from the Byrds? Crosby.
David Crosby.
Yeah, David Crosby. So Graham Nash, where did Graham Nash come from? Did he come from Buffalo Springfield as well, or was he kind of like his own thing?
He was Buffalo. No, so what do you say? Nash. I want to get this right. He was in the Hollies.
Hollies, that's right. He was one of the vocalists for those songs that people know from the Hollies.
So can we? So there's one that they left out of this list.
Mm-hmm.
1967, the Jeff Beck group. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm going to try to point out the people that were in the original band, but when I say one, you have to understand he hadn't done anything up until this point. And that was Rod Stewart. So it was
Rod Stewart was in the Faces, right? Was that before or after the Jeff Beck?
I think that was after.
Okay.
Because I think his first record was. I'm looking to see what his first record was right now while we're talking about this, because I'm pretty sure it was Jeff Beck group.
Because you had Rod Stewart.
Anybody who knows, comment in the Facebook group. I'm not gonna waste all your time looking for it. But so it was Rod Stewart, Jeff Beck, Ronnie Wood, Jet Harris.
Ronnie Wood.
Jet Harris quickly replaced by Dave Ambrose.
Yep.
So I mean, this is a who's who. But the funny thing is, this is a supergroup before supergroups, because none of these guys, like Ronnie Wood, him and Rod Stewart went and started the Faces after this.
The Faces, right? When they left the Jeff Beck group, they did the Faces.
Yeah. So, right. So they were active from 1969. Jeff Beck group was in 1967. So yeah, they started it after.
Yep.
Which is pretty crazy if you think about it. So again, this should not be surprising with anybody who's familiar with Jeff Beck's work. He's often doing things before everybody else does them. So that's 1967. So that's between Cream and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. Then in 1969, we have this, like, because all these original bands, like 1960 to 1967, start breaking up, right? So you have Blind Faith, which is Eric Clapton of the Yardbirds and John the Blues Breakers, and Cream. Ginger Baker from the Graham Bond Organization and Cream. And
Stevie
then
Winwood
Steve
was in there,
Winwood, right? It goes on.
Who was just
a
boy at that point.
Yeah, he'd been in Traffic and Spencer Davis Group.
Yep.
And then Rick Greck of The Family.
Yep.
And then you had Humble Pie, and this is my favorite one.
Jeez.
Steve Marriott of the Small Faces, Peter Frampton of the Herd, which I always thought that Peter Frampton's first band was Humble Pie, but it was actually the Herd. Greg Ridley of Spooky Tooth, which you'll probably see more people from Spooky Tooth in this list.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that band.
Nobody likes that band, but those guys that were in that band went on to be Foreigner and everything else. It was like, what the hell? Clem Clemson of Coliseum, Jerry Shirley of Apostolic Intervention. It's cool to do this exercise. I know that this might be kind of boring for us to talk about these things, but
I don't think it's boring.
Cool to do. Well, let's face it, Jim. We're the audience for this podcast.
I think our listeners are interested in this kind of thing.
Yeah, if you've never looked at the supergroups, because like everybody knows there's these groups like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Cream, and stuff like that. But you don't realize how many of them there are.
Right.
It's
and how many
insane.
times they cross paths. Think about Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, and Jimmy Page.
Yeah.
And
over and over and over.
Yeah.
Grand Funk Railroad, right? Mark Farner from Terry Knight and the Pack. Don Brewer from Terry Knight and the Pack. Mel Shaker from Question and the Mysterians. So that's 1969. There's two other bands. There's Cactus, which was Jim McCarty, Rusty Day, Tim Bogert, and Carmen Appice. Or Appice, depending on what decade we're in.
Yeah. Who later joined up with Rod Stewart.
Right. And then of course now we're getting into the bigger ones of the 70s, like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, which was Keith Emerson from the Nice, Greg Lake from the Gods and King Crimson, and Carl Palmer from Atomic Rooster and the Crazy World of Arthur Brown. Carl Palmer is probably the least well known of this group, but has gone on to become probably the best known of the group, other than Keith Emerson.
Because he went on to be in Asia as well.
The sad thing about that band is that both Keith and Greg are now gone.
Yeah.
And Carl Palmer is carrying the torch, but I mean, you can't really replace Keith Emerson and Greg Lake.
I would also argue that Jimi Hendrix's first band was a super group of sorts, because Hendrix was playing for who was the guy he was playing for before he went solo?
Which one are you talking about? The one in the 50s or the early 60s?
Yeah.
I don't have the record sitting in front of me. I can pull up my phone real quick.
So he was playing guitar for singers.
Yes, he was. He played for Little Richard. He played for a lot of guys. But there is a guy he cut records with.
And then you had so you go from that, and his drummer came from somewhere else, and his bass player came from the Byrds or something like that. So.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it in my list. I'll post it.
His bass player actually came in thinking he was going to be in for a guitar audition.
Yeah.
And they said, no, you're going to be playing bass.
Noel Redding.
Yeah, Noel Redding.
And I'll put the show notes for the other group that he worked with. I know he works with the Isley Brothers.
That's what I was
part of it. That's part of it.
Yep.
I'm adding it to my notes right now.
Yep. So anyway, so now we're in the 70s.
So we started with Emerson, Lake and Palmer in 1970. We also have Ginger Baker's Air Force.
What about Led Zeppelin? Led Zeppelin, if you ask me, that's a supergroup.
The only thing that keeps Led Zeppelin from being a supergroup is that up to Led Zeppelin,
Page was in the Yardbirds.
Robert Plant was not well known, and neither was John Bonham. So,
no, but Page and what's his face were
Page and
John Paul Jones.
Yeah, JPJ, John Paul Jones. Right. And that's a supergroup of sorts.
And it was supposed to be a supergroup, if I remember the story. And
they were wanting Roger. So he was wanting Roger Daltrey as a singer.
Yeah,
and John Entwistle. No, it's Keith Moon, not John Entwistle. No, actually, no. I take it back. I think they already. No, he already had Robert Plant. He wanted Keith Moon, and he wanted John Entwistle. and it ended up turning out
Keith
that
Moon,
when Keith
Moon
wouldn't
said something
do it,
like, "If we did that, it would go over like a Led Zeppelin or something."
yeah,
like
that's
that.
actually where the title of the band came from. And they were intending on calling themselves the Yardbirds too. And I guess they jammed together. Like, it was like gonna happen. And then they basically decided that, no, this is probably not the right way to do this. And so they went, because let's face it, Jimmy Page he's not as rock and roll as, and I say that in the, like, the kind of punk sense of the word, as, Pete Townsend winds up becoming. So I think that happened for the best. As much as I would have loved to see Keith Moon and Jimmy Page throw down together, I think that happened for the best. And John Entwistle would have been a great choice too. Yes. But it just so happened that Robert Plant knew of this other drummer that was going to work really well. And John Paul Jones was around, and it was like, okay, we can do this. Instead.
I think that the one thing you can say about Keith Moon and John Bonham, which, by the way, obviously they are very different drummers. Both of them were locked in more with the melody than the bass. They were able to play melodic lines on top of being able to keep that kick for the bass player to follow in.
Yes, excellent drummers. I do want to make a comment. I had a conversation with somebody about John Bonham the other day, and I was told that his playing is very masturbatory. So if you're my listener, you know who I'm talking. I'm looking at you directly, and I said this in that group, and I'm going to say it on the podcast. I'll start listening to you when you find me a drummer that does not like John Bonham.
Yeah,
and when these people say, "Oh, well," the guy from Foo Fighters, what's his name? Dave Grohl. Dave Grohl's the torchbearer for rock and roll. Guess what? Guess who Dave Grohl's favorite drummer is?
Oh, of course.
There's only two schools in rock drumming. There's two schools in rock drumming. There's Keith Moon and John Bonham, right? And Jason Bonham had both because he was taught by Keith Moon because Keith Moon and John Bonham were good friends. Okay. Yep. So it's a whole thing. Anyway, so we get from there. We get to Derek and the Dominoes, which is Clapton, Whitlock, Rattle, Gordon, and Dwayne Allman. Which the funny thing is, they list Dwayne Allman in the Allman Brothers Band. That hadn't happened yet. That was happening at the same time that Derek and the Dominoes was, because he had to leave to go over there and do that record.
Right, and Dwayne was in Muscle Shoals at that time, right?
I think he had just dropped out of that.
Just
whole
left
thing.
Muscle Shoals.
So I don't think Muscle Shoals was like an official band. I think
it was a project.
It was a collective, is what it was. Right. Like, we need our band to play this song, and like, we got the singer in here, so just call the guys up. And it was like they had a list, and they just called themselves Muscle Shoals. It wasn't. They weren't an official business entity or anything like that.
Oh no more than the Wrecking Crew was an official band.
Right. Just the regular guys they used together. And then later on you have ABBA, which that I didn't know. And I don't recognize any of these bands, but they are a supergroup.
Yeah, they were a supergroup, and they were one of those production companies put them together to write. And you've got it. I don't care what anybody says. They wrote some hooks, and they were well loved, and they were incredibly musical.
So far, based on this list right here, the most prolific,
we're into the mid-70s by now.
The most prolific bands. No, we're still like 71. The most prolific bands are 72 for ABBA, by the way. That we've seen are Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Cream, and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. Okay, so more than 3 albums apiece. Unless you consider Led Zeppelin. If you consider Led Zeppelin, obviously they're clearly the most prolific of the set so far. Of
those,
yeah. So now we have 1972. We also got Beck, Bogert, and a piece. That was one record. Okay.
Right. The Faces was one record or 2 records.
Yeah, it's 2.
You had the Small Faces was like 1 record. Blind Tuna or that was only 1 or 2 records.
So the funny part is, if we're not counting Led Zeppelin, the most prolific band that we've talked about so far is ABBA.
Yeah. Yep. So far, because ABBA lasted right into 1982.
Yeah, long time. So Beck, Bogert, a piece. We lasted 1 album. Then we got Journey. Yes, folks, Journey was a supergroup.
That's right.
Making them easily the highest selling supergroup on this list. and most prolific.
Oh, ABBA would be up there next to them. With
I
the
suspect
sales.
I suspect Journey outsold ABBA a long time ago. Even though ABBA's a big band, the thing is, so you got to remember the three best-selling bands of all time are still like the Beatles and Pink Floyd, the Beatles, and Led Zeppelin. They have three of the highest-selling records of all time.
ABBA sold 375 million records.
Now, are they counting streams?
Nope. Those are singles and
that's going to be my gripe at the end of this episode. We're going to talk about streams versus purchases.
Streams is a different thing, and I can't go into that. All right.
No, we're going to talk about that at the end of the episode because I want to end on that.
Wikipedia is saying that ABBA's record sales are estimated at 400 million copies worldwide.
What about Journey?
You got to remember, they weren't as big in the States as they were overseas.
Yeah, I know. Journey was big overseas too, though. In Asia, of all places.
Let's see. Journey's record sales were, now Asia was big, but not that big. Journey record sales is in the 48 million and worldwide sales of 75 million.
Even close. I'm really surprised
they
by that.
They offered ABBA, I remember a thing where they offered ABBA like some ridiculous amount of money. I kid you not.
Yeah, I remember that. I know what you're talking about.
$1 billion to go on tour, and they said no. Those people could not stand. Well, you got to remember. So the two blondes and the brunettes.
Yeah, they were solo artists, and then you had that. Yeah, so yeah,
and they were the first band where the members broke up. They were Fleetwood Mac before Fleetwood Mac, another supergroup that had a laundry list of great guitar players. ABBA broke up because they could not be in the same room together. Very much like Fleetwood Mac wound up being after Rumors.
So I want to go through the list here.
So let's keep going. Yep.
Of Journey, and I want to talk about who these members are. Right. So George Tickner, Ross Valerie, Prairie Prince. Okay, from Frumius Bandersnatch, Steve Miller Band, and the Tubes, respectively. Yep. And then you had Greg Rowley of Santana and Neil Schon of Santana. So this is one of those bands that very much comes from Santana. Like we were talking about bands that descended from other bands. And this Santana. Journey is the result of Neil Schon trying to throw out Santana from Santana.
Yeah,
that's what this is actually.
That's what that is the rumor that
the lore.
Yeah, that
I don't think it's a rumor at this point. I think it's not even legend. I think it's a known thing.
They've only recently buried the hatchet, by the way.
Yes, I know.
Last year, a year before.
So Ainsley Dunbar replaced Prairie Prince, and he is from Jeff Beck Group, Frank Zappa, and David Bowie. So if you put that into perspective, I mean, we have a massive lineup there. And
when Ross Valerie left, you had Randy Jackson come in, and Randy Jackson had been playing for somebody else before that.
Who is their original singer?
Yeah, the original singer was not Steve Perry.
I know
Steve Perry was like third.
No, I know he wasn't. That's what I'm saying. I don't remember who their original singers were.
No, nobody does. Nobody cares.
Anyway, moving on. Bad Company. That's an obvious one. Paul Rogers of Free. Mick Rouse of Mott the Hoople. Boz Burrell of King Crimson. And he's also done solo work. And then Simon Kirk of Free. So basically that was a band that was descended from Free.
King Crimson and Uriah Heep is another one that people.
Well, you're going to see a lot of King Crimson and Frank Zappa as we go here, because the guys in King Crimson and the guys in Frank Zappa you have to be an incredible player to fit into those groups. So
Uriah Heep.
Yeah, they'll take anything for money. Like that's basically what happens. Like, well, we'll do that. Okay.
Yeah.
KGB, and then Armageddon. KGB is Michael Bloomfield, Rick Greck. We've heard him on the list before. Carmen DePietz. You're going to see a lot of him. Barry Goldberg, Ray Lewis Kennedy, and then Armageddon was Bobby Caldwell, Louis Sinamo, and I don't see now we're getting to bands I don't really recognize. Martin Pugh of Steamhammer and Keith Rolfe, Yardbirds and Renaissance, obviously. Sonic Rendezvous Band, don't know this one at all. It's got one of the guys from MC5 in it.
Well, it's hard because that one, never heard of that.
Yeah. So I think some of these are, they're being proposed by people that are Wikipedia users that not necessarily everybody's familiar with. And they're like, I don't know if I really qualify as a supergroup per se.
Yeah. It certainly didn't get off the ground.
This one I didn't know existed, and this makes me feel bad as a Deep Purple fan, like massive Deep Purple fan. Pace, Ashton, and Lord.
Yeah, that was like a project, more like a, the Alan Parsons.
Yeah, I think so too.
Which, by the way, again, I know that these guys weren't in huge bands, but the Alan Parsons Project was a supergroup of sorts.
So basically, this is the drummer from Deep Purple, Ian Pace, the organ player, John Lord, and then Tony Ashton of Ashton Gardner Dyke Family and Green Bullfrog. Now, Ashton and Ian Pace had worked together in Green Bullfrog. Their only album, they had one album with that group. It's called Malice in Wonderland. It was released in 1977. So if we really stop and we think about that, like that's clearly a project because they didn't aim for multiple albums. I don't think a band dissolved. I think what happened is that like Deep Purple did something, and then they were like, "All right, we got to go back and do our real thing." So
that was just Lord getting some stuff out of his system.
Yeah. So then you have the band UK. Now I'm sort of familiar with this band, but I didn't know who was in it. It's John Wetton of the Family, King Crimson, Uriah Heep. Again, here we're going to start seeing those bands coming up again. Alan Holdsworth.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
Yeah, I know, right?
Bottom, Tempest, and the Soft Machine, and just himself. Eddie Jobson, Curved Air, Roxy Music, Frank Zappa, 801. Bill Bruford, who you will see his name on this list many a time.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, and King Crimson.
Yep.
They did two albums, 1978 and 1979. They did UK and Danger Money. And this is the best part. When Bruford left, guess who came in to replace him? Because I think he did a tour with Genesis, and that's why he left.
Okay.
Yeah, that would have been right. 1977. There's my Genesis knowledge coming out.
John Lord?
No, Terry Bozzio came to replace Bill Bruford from Frank Zappa. Terry Bozzio from Frank Zappa. So we're gonna keep going.
Funny.
Keep going. So now we're at 1978. So we're getting towards the end of the 80s. And you can see that the number of these supergroups is diminishing. You might have one or two a year because, number one, the records start slowing down. The record industry starts realizing they can make more money if they don't put out 10 records a week. So they start slowing down. So in 1978, Seru Garan, which is an all-French band, you can look at again, follow along on the list. If you're interested, you can look up some of these. I'm gonna go over the hot ones at this point. 1979, we had Blizzard of Oz.
Yep.
Which was the band name of Ozzy Osbourne's band, which started out, of course, Ozzy, Randy, Bob Daisley of Rainbow, and Lee Kerslake of Uriah Heep.
Yep.
And then the Notorious Cherry Bombs, which had Vince Gill in it.
Really?
What?
Vince Gill was in there?
All right.
Oh, Vince Gill was in the Pure Prairie League, too.
Yeah,
that had to
that's
be
Vince Gill.
In there. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the Notorious Cherry Bombs. Rodney Crowell, Emmylou Harris and the Hot Band, Vince Gill of Pure Prairie League and solo, Emery Gordy Jr. of Emmylou Harris and the Hot Band. So this is Emmylou Harris's band's like spinoff. Richard Bennett of Neil Diamond, Tony Brown, and then Larry London of the Funk Brothers and the TCB Band.
Now, see, to me, what they're leaving out, they're leaving people out here. Pure Prairie League was made up of some folks, but really Pure Prairie League begat some other stuff. Now, you can't call the Eagles, like take the Eagles. The Eagles, you can't call them a supergroup, but they became a supergroup because you wound up with Joe Walsh, who was from, obviously the stuff that he did before that. You had, what's his name from Robbins from the Pure Prairie League. You had, so that's kind of an interesting thing. Like Edgar Winter's not listed there. Yet look at the stuff you had from the Rascals. You had who's the guy that not Dangerfield? Oh, jeez. Starts with a D and it's like Dangerfield. But
Rick Derringer.
Derringer. Rick Derringer. You had a lot of people that floated through his band that was he didn't have just. It was a whole roll of people that came through there.
So that's Notorious Cherry Bombs. The funny thing is they had one album called The Notorious Cherry Bombs, which was released in 2004. Now these guys were together in 1980, which means that they recorded something and never released it, probably.
Wow.
So then there's a band called The New Race, which is Radio Birdman people and the Stooges, Ron Ashton and the Stooges, and Dennis Thompson of MC5. Yeah. I don't know enough about MC5. I like their music. I just don't know enough about them. BLT, that's Jack Bruce, Bill Lorden, and Robin Trower.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
That's a big record too. And actually, later on, Jack Bruce and Robin Trower got together again, and they did another. They did a Robin Trower record together.
Yep.
So that's a good one. And then we got like Asia. Now we're finally hitting 82. Right. John Wetton, Steve Howe, Carl Palmer, Jeff Downs. The funny part about Jeff Downs is the one that's kind of off the wall here, except that he played with Yes, because he was best known for the Buggles.
Yeah, people did, when they did that album, I don't think anybody knew that Jeff Downs was one of the members of the three members of the Buggles, the actual Buggles, who wrote the song, folks. Video killed the radio star.
And of course, John Wetton of King Crimson, also of the family in Uriah Heep.
Of the family in Uriah Heep, yep.
So that they, of course, have had numerous records.
And of course, Palmer.
And now
laundry list of Palmer.
Yeah, well, a laundry list of guitar players have gone through that band. I mean, they
oh yeah.
Guthrie, I don't know whether Guthrie Govan was fired or quit, but I mean, Guthrie Govan toured with that band. Okay, that says it all.
Yeah, they had the drummer. What the heck's his name? Sapp or something. That's been a drummer for everybody. AC/DC.
Yeah.
He's the bald guy that's on the AC/DC Live at Donington album and DVD. If you ever watched that or heard it, that's him. So that was him on Thunderstruck.
So that was 1983, 1982, and then 1983. There's some other international bands in this list, and then all of a sudden, 1984. Because if you know your history, I believe it was 82 that Zeppelin finally disbanded after attempting to record a record without John Bonham and failing miserably. Jimmy Page's immediate project in 84 was The Firm with Paul Rogers. So it was Paul Rogers of Free and Bad Company, him from the Yardbirds and Led Zeppelin, Tony Franklin of Roy Harper's band, Chris Slade of Uriah Heep, and Manfred Mann's Earth Band. So again,
Chris Slade,
Uriah Heep is the fun one here because we have seen repeatedly members from Uriah Heep in all of these projects. Probably three-quarters of the ones we've looked at have had somebody from Uriah Heep in them. Then we have Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, which that band I've never even heard of. Nobody super notable to me in the band. Again, follow along the list if you can. Power Station with Robert Palmer. There's Robert Palmer, Tony Thompson of Chic, John Taylor of Duran Duran, and Andy Taylor of Duran Duran. And then we had GTR. Now here's where GTR gets interesting, because you brought them up before. The reason I know about GTR is because I'm a huge Yes and Genesis fan. It's Max Bacon, Steve Hackett of Genesis, Steve Howe of Yes. So you have the meeting of the minds, the two big progressive juggernauts.
Yep.
Basically, when they kicked their guitar players out or they left of their own accord, they put together GTR. Which they did I think 2 albums technically, and it's good stuff. That band was never meant to stay though, because Steve Hackett after leaving Genesis is really his own thing. Well,
and again, that thing skips bands like Toto, which was definitely a supergroup. Now, of course, they were made up of studio musicians.
What year was Toto founded?
I want to say 79 or 80.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And it was Chris Slade, the drummer that I was thinking of earlier was Chris Slade.
Yeah.
I knew it was started with this. So the band Toto, they kicked it off
1976.
1976. So it was pretty early.
And their initial lineup was, because they've had a laundry list of players.
Well, they mostly replaced in the beginning. It was mostly the singers. They had a singer for the first album, singer for the second album, it was like they can keep a singer for some reason. Yeah.
So, the funny thing is, the only one I know out of this list, outside of being a session player, was Steve Lukather. The other people in this list, like Mike Vaccaro, I know, but he didn't come until later. He didn't come until the 80s.
Steely Dan was another supergroup, but you see, I think that the reason they can't call them a supergroup is because
a tough one, because
they
really weren't a band. They didn't have an actual band anymore. By the time they got to like the third or fourth album, they had basically fired the band And
Yes.
they brought the band in as session players. That's what was funny. So even Jeff Skunk Baxter, who's probably their most famous guitar player outside of Larry Carlton, were brought in he was brought in as a contract session player.
That's right.
Even though he was, the default guitar player for the band. Like it's hysterical to me that that's how they operated. So Steely Dan was really just Donald Fagen and David Becker.
Steely Dan, the Alan Parsons Project, who was made up of members of Magic and stuff like that, or not Magic, Pilot. Their hit was Magic. You had who was the other one that was like that at that time? Because there was a lot of that where they created a band from session players. Like I said, the Little River Band was one of those.
That's what Toto was. I mean,
Toto was. It was somebody else that I was thinking of there. It'll come to me later. But there was that time when they said, "Oh well, let's just do session players." But the weird thing about Fagen and who was the other one? Not Becker. Was it Becker? Walter Becker?
Yeah, Donald Fagen and Walter Becker.
Yeah. So their first drummer, of course, he wasn't a member of Steely Dan, but their first drummer.
Well, yeah, we've talked about this before. It's Chevy Chase.
Yeah.
But
there's your trivia night thing. You're welcome. But yeah, they brought in a rolling group of people because they were moving out west. They went out to L.A.
Well, they didn't start the roving band thing until they got out to L.A. So their first two records were done with pretty much the same people. And then when they got, as I understand, they were very expensive to produce because the kind of quality those guys demanded in the studio was expensive because it took a lot of man hours.
Yep.
So when they went out west, they fired everybody, put everybody on contract.
Exactly.
As I'm looking here, we're getting to some more notables. Mike and the Mechanics, which is Mike Rutherford of Genesis.
From Genesis,
And then there's a laundry list of players there.
You had the one guy from was a band that did Tempted.
Well, there's Paul Young of Sad Cafe, Paul Carrick of Ace Squeeze.
Paul Carrick.
Yeah. Adrian Lee, Peter Van Hook. Some of these guys actually went on to do things after Mike and the Mechanics. But that's really Mike Rutherford's project where he hires a band to play with him. He should just call the band Mike Rutherford, but whatever.
Well, those guys are mechanics.
There's some good ones though. So
they fix his car when he's.
So here's the one that I missed from 1985 that's really important. The Highwaymen.
Oh yeah,
with Johnny Cash, Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, and Chris Christopherson.
Yep.
You don't get more A-list than that. Okay.
You do not get anyone. Those guys, I remember
except for the Traveling Wilburys.
That one's later. That's the 90s.
Yeah, I know. We're coming.
So if you take those four guys, I don't think until the Traveling Wilburys could you have a band that didn't really exist outside of one album, really. And I think the Traveling Wilburys did too, right? Excuse me. Those guys, when they came through, when they toured, everybody wanted to go. I don't care what kind of music you liked, everybody went. I saw them live twice, the Highwaymen twice, and that was just incredible to see those guys together and to hear those. I'm a singer, and I know that there's some of that voice can wear on you badly, but let me tell you, that was a great thing.
Yeah, I mean, just seeing Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings, incredible. So anyway, Tin Machine. This is 1988. Tin Machine. Oh, yeah. David Bowie, Reeves Gabrels, Tony Sales, Hunt Sales, and Eric Sherman. I can never say his name properly. That was they did a couple of records. 4, I think, in total, including the live record. Bad English.
Bad English made up
John Waite, Neil Schon.
Yep, the Babies. You had
and then Blue Murder, which is John Sykes.
Then
Lizzie and Whitesnake, Ray Gillen, and various others. Tony Franklin of The Firm and Jimmy Page's group, and then Cozy Powell, Jeff Beck group, Rainbow, Michael Schenker, Whitesnake, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Again, Emerson, Lake and Powell. Sorry.
Yes.
And then Carmen Appice came in later from that band. And
but wasn't Whitesnake a super group?
no, and I'll tell you why. Because Whitesnake was a hired gun band. They're in the same vein as Steely Dan.
Well, okay, I will agree with that for their hits, but the first iteration of Whitesnake included Bernie Marsden.
Yeah, he was a session player.
Yeah, but he had played. Who did Bernie Marsden play for?
Yeah, but he was a session player. It doesn't matter. I mean, I could give you a laundry list of people that Larry Carlton played for. And it makes no difference. He's still a session player. He didn't have an allegiance to that band. He didn't join that band. He was just brought in to do this stuff.
UFO.
And then toured with them. Right.
He was with UFO before that.
Yep.
So, okay. So he wasn't a member of UFO?
He was a member of UFO. So that's a big question because I've heard varying conflicting reports about how UFO handled their records too. So UFO could technically be considered a supergroup too because it had all these guys in it, but I don't think they were expecting people to have the kind of brand allegiance because look at Billy Sheehan, he was in UFO.
Yeah.
For at least a point, for example. So then later on we got, of course, now we're getting Traveling Wilburys. So since we talked about it already, we're not going to go too deep into it, but George Harrison, Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, Jeff Lynne, and Roy Orbison. Yeah. And actually what caused the demise of that band was the death of Roy Orbison.
Yeah. They would have kept going.
So they did 2 records, which for a group like that, that's insane. Traveling, and the funny thing is they did 2 records and they had Traveling Wilburys Volume 1 and Traveling Wilburys Volume 3.
It was a joke to keep people guessing. Right. Where it was Volume 2.
So, and then Mr. Big, and that is a super group.
Oh, yeah. Mr. Big, yeah.
Eric Martin of his solo project, and then 415, and then Paul Gilbert of Racer X, Billy Sheehan of Talus, UFO, David Lee Roth's band, and then Pat Torpy of Implementary, John Parr, Linda Carlisle, American Bandstand. So, and of course, Richie Kotzen was in there for a while. He was in Poison.
Richie Kotzen was in Poison, and he slept with one of the members' wives.
Is that what ended up happening?
Yep, that's what happened.
Okay, so
they would never let him darken their doorstep again. Not that some people are like, yeah, well, fuck Poison anyway. But I'm just saying.
Well, Poison was basically disbanded at the end of Kotzen anyway, so it really makes no difference. Badlands, Jakey Lee, Ray Gillen of Black Sabbath, Blue Murder, George Chasson of Steeler, and Eric Singer. I don't know that I would consider that a supergroup, but it is certainly an interesting combination of players that come from other places. And then we get electronics. Now we're getting into the bands that I don't really think really fit the supergroup moniker as much. They're just interesting collections of people. Damn Yankees.
That
was Ted Nugent, Tommy Shaw, Jack Blades, and Michael Cardellone.
You're not going to say that's a super.
No, that one is. That is definitely is. That's why I brought that one up. No, that one definitely is. And they had 2 records. They were very good records. That was Damn Yankees and Don't Tread. And then Ringo Starr had his all-star band. I don't consider that a supergroup.
No, that's a and they're still going. They were here last
13
year.
13 distinct lineups in 29 years. And the only constant is Ringo Starr himself. And then we had the Breeders. Yeah, okay, the Breeders maybe. But you know what? 2 of the members didn't come from other places, so I don't agree with that. Don Dokken, it's backing band, which is Don Dokken, John Norum, Billy White, Peter Baltz, and Mickey D of King Diamond and Motorhead. I don't agree with that being a... No. See, we're just getting into... There's Temple of the Dog. Now that was Chris Cornell, Stone Gossard, Jeff Ament, Matt Cameron, Eddie Vedder, and Mike McCready. So it's like basically half of Pearl Jam and half of Soundgarden. Plus,
you got Slash the Snake Pit. That's got to be coming up. And then of course you got what's the band that Slash had?
Velvet Revolver. That's a supergroup. But I don't think Slash the Snake Pit is.
Okay. I'll give you Slash the Snake Pit.
See, now we're getting, so like we're getting kind of obscure. Everybody knows who Phil Anselmo is probably. But here's a band with him. It's called Down. It's Phil Anselmo and then 4 other guys that I
By
don't
the way,
recognize
Bernie
any of the bands
Marsden-
they were in.
Bernie Marsden was in a band called Babe Ruth. Do you want to take a guess who was in Babe Ruth?
No, I'm curious.
Pace Ashton Lord, Tony Ashton, and ex-Deep Purple members Ian Pace and John Lord.
Yeah, so that's pretty interesting.
So
that's a spin-off of the Pace Ashton Lord project.
I don't think anybody could call that a supergroup because I don't think they released anything good. But they did do 2 albums, Stealing Home and Kid Stuff. When you're that rich, you can do whatever you want.
At that point, it's just a fun project. So Contraband, which was Richard. This one I remembered. Michael Schenker, Tracy Guns, Cher Peterson of Vixen, and then Bobby Blotzer of Rat. That's a good band. They did 1 record, 91. And then if you go on, so they do actually have Slash's Snake Pit listed here. I mean, I'm kind of on the fence with that one. I think several of the members in that band were not well known.
No.
And there was 2 there's 2 lineups. So the later lineup, I don't recognize any of them except for Ryan Roxy.
Yeah. Slash carried that.
Well, I didn't think those records were anything worth writing home about.
No.
We're 94 now. Bloodline, which is Joe Bonamassa's first band, I think. With Aaron Davis, Waylon Krieger, who's the son of Robbie Krieger, and then Barry Oakley Jr., who's the son of Barry Oakley. They did 1 record in 94. They would have been really young. Bonamassa was probably like 16 or 17 when they did that. They must have been young. There's a band called the Backbeat Band, which some of our members, our listeners may be familiar with. They've got David Grohl, Dave Pirner of Soul Asylum, Thurston Moore of Sonic Youth, Mike Mills of R.E.M., Greg Dooley of the Afghan Wigs, and Don Fleming of Gumball.
Now, speaking of Dave Grohl, just outside of this context for just a second, the first Foo Fighters albums, I'm saying that, I can't say it 3 times fast. Those were really
up next in the list. By the way.
That was really just David Grohl, right?
Yeah, but I consider
on the album. That's like when what's his face, Lenny Kravitz.
He had collaborators doing stuff on those records, but he was playing the drums and the guitars.
It was pretty much him doing guitar and drums
and vocals,
and obviously the vocals. And the bass player for Foo Fighters, if I remember right, he almost got his butt kicked out. He was like, I'm too good for this.
You're talking about Pat Smear. Is it Pat Smear?
Yeah. And David Grohl said, okay, there's a door. Don't let it hit your ass on the way out. And he came begging for his job back before anything else happened, before he got replaced.
Well, so the Foo Fighters is an interesting one. I would consider them more of the Steely Dan variety because, again, they have a laundry list of musicians that have contributed to
but really the drummer, although I know that in the studio it's Grohl, the drummer they use live,
I don't think it's all Grohl
always
anymore.
The same guy.
I don't think it's all Grohl anymore. I think he actually uses. So they have a studio drummer that helps them. I think he's also the live drummer.
The drummer he uses live has been pretty much the same guy almost the whole time. The one, at least that you see in their early videos. The bass player's been there for almost forever. But they've had a couple of guitar players have come and gone.
Yeah.
I remember.
Yeah.
Except live, he's pretty much kept that one guy next to him.
I forget who that is. I don't think it's Pat Smear. I think Pat Smear's a guitar player.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
See, I'm really dating myself now because these are bands that I grew up with that I don't really know a whole lot about. I have Foo Fighters records, and I don't know much about the lineup because I always considered it David Grohl. That is his project, and he is very much in control. Yeah, Pat Smear is the other guitar player.
Yeah.
But I remember that story about the bass player.
Yep.
I'm just going down through the list. So now we're getting into these super groups that didn't really sell a whole lot of records before they were together, which is kind of funny to me. I would not consider these groups super groups per se.
No.
Which is really funny because all the members of Guns N' Roses stuck together. Duff McKagan and Matt Sorum are together a lot on this list.
Yeah.
Going forward. Now and the stuff's getting way more detailed too, and I think it's because people are like actually paying attention to what's going on around them and writing this stuff down or telling these stories. Let's see. There's some rap supergroups in here. I mean, there's a lot of them too, and many of these bands are. I
don't know if you could really call them. That's just it, though. When you take a rap supergroup, the very definition of the supergroup goes away when, hey, come in and rap on my one album.
Yeah, and not going to get into that debate for the purposes of the show, but I kind of agree with you. Liquid Tension Experiment, that's a later supergroup, and that's Mike Portnoy, John Petrucci, Jordan Rudess in 2011. If you have not followed along with Tony Levin over the years, he's from King Crimson and many, many, many other projects, including Peter Gabriel's band. Check out some of his stuff. If you play bass and you don't know who Tony Levin is, get some learning in, because the guy's a freaking monster.
Yes, he is. If there's a couple of bass players that I would throw into that pool, Tony Levin would definitely be in.
He's in my short list of, like, if I wanted to put together a super group, he'd be in the top 10 guys that would be on that list.
Oh, definitely. Who's the guy the older guy that played for James Taylor? He'd be in there. I forget his name offhand. Probably. Tall guy that looks kind of like Santa Claus. He's got that. He's always had a white beard, even when he was younger.
I'm just laughing because, like, some of these bands, it's a bunch of people, but, like, I looked at the list of the bands that they were in. I'm like, I don't know any of these people. That's not a super group.
I think the big thing to take from this, when it comes from the super groups, is this. Number one, you had a mixture of musicians who commingled throughout the years in and out of their supergroups. And we could probably, if we went outside of the supergroup thing, and we looked at
everybody's been in other groups and
we could probably say, like, Bernie Marsden, who's played on several albums, and Eric Clapton, who played for several different bands. And you're thinking, why would Eric Clapton have to play for anybody? He doesn't. He did it for fun.
So I got a couple more that I want to bring up. A Perfect Circle.
Sure. Oh yeah,
right? That's a huge one.
As a matter of fact, I'm sitting here with my Smashing Pumpkins Guitar World right in front of me.
Yeah.
And that's a
Perfect Circle's a huge one. And there was another one I wanted to bring up, and I'm scrolling through the list just to make sure I don't leave out. Audio Slave. That's probably the biggest supergroup of the last 20 years.
Yeah. Because that had
Oysterhead. Trey Anastasio of Fish, Stuart Copeland of the Police, and Les Claypool of Primus got together, and they decided they wanted to make a metal band. That's what Oysterhead was.
Wow, that must have sucked balls.
Actually, it was pretty good.
I think I just can't picture Troy Anastasio. I can't picture anything he does. Trey, whatever his name is.
Yeah.
I can't picture liking.
He played this guitar that was basically made out of a fucking log. It was a whole thing.
And the other two guys, I think that they're awesome. Stu Copeland, and obviously
Copeland is one of my picks for best drummer ever.
And Les Claypool. I mean, obviously, that's another bass player. If you guys haven't listened to him, then your bass player.
Basically, he's a guitar player that forgot he was playing bass.
Yeah.
Colonel Claypool's bucket of Bernie Brains.
Yes. Oh my God. Yeah.
Les Claypool, Buckethead, Bernie Worrell of Parliament Funkadelic, and Brian Brain Manti of Primus, Buckethead, and Guns N' Roses. Yeah, that's a band right there. Yep. And they actually had a really, really good record that nobody listened to. So they probably shouldn't be on this list anyway. Velvet Revolver. They had two records. The second one was terrible. The first one was barely listenable, in my opinion.
There was a couple. You had those big hit songs on, and then the rest of the record was just total.
Okay, I just want to.
I am with you.
So, Dave Kushner was brought in for this record. As to be a second guitar player, Wasted Youth, Electric Glove Hogs, Loaded. I don't think he was that well known. I think he was a buddy of Slash's from some other thing, maybe Slash's Snake Pit or something. And Kushner Kushner did a lot of the guitar work on the record. which was really, really funny because you got Slash on this record playing stuff that he's consciously trying to get away from the Guns N' Roses sound. So he's playing BC Riches and using Floyd Rose Trems and all kinds of crap on there that's just really, really funny.
Totally getting away from what he likes.
Yeah. And then but the thing is, the record follows the formula of Appetite for Destruction, which is why the first record, which is why I'm like, it's not a good record. It just isn't. It's okay. I mean, it's probably the best hard rock record of 2002.
Oh, yeah. And let's face it. I mean, I'm not going to complain about it, given the fact that at least it was still carrying the torch for rock.
Yeah.
I mean, you got guys like Audio Slave, which is, what's the space there?
Chris Cornell, Tom Morello.
Tom Morello.
Who is basically playing turntables with a guitar.
Yeah. I mean, that guy can make sounds. He's a Jeff Beck of another different category.
Like another style of
right.
He's definitely an avant-garde style guitar player, and I can respect him a lot.
Yeah, me too. I don't particularly. I'm not crazy about what was the band he had that was kind of metal rap.
You're talking about Rage Against the Machine.
Rage Against the Machine.
They got some good records too. It just depends on like what you're going for.
Again,
that's 90s music. You're not a big fan. Like I grew up with that stuff, so.
But I liked Morello when he did his Night Watchman thing.
Yeah.
And of course the Audio Slave stuff. So yeah. And I dig Morello. I just didn't dig the guy that was singing for him. I just didn't. That whole swearing at me and yelling at me stuff.
Not my favorite either. But he's the heart and soul of what Rage Against the Machine stood for. So when he left, like it was kind of a mess. So the funny thing about Velvet Revolver is that listen to the list of names because everybody knows who's here, and I'm sure this is probably just going to be touching base for everybody else. Scott Weiland, Duff McKagan, Matt Sorum, Slash, and Dave Kushner, and the standout member of this band is none of the people you would expect. In my opinion, it was Dave Kushner. Because he was left to do, like, basically rescue a record, and he was a guy nobody had ever heard of. Yeah. And he did a decent job. It's not unlistenable. And it was, so they disbanded in 2007, which I found surprising. And that was because Scott Weiland was fired.
He decided, I thought that he decided, he got fired, but I thought he made the decision to go to back to.
He went back to Stone Temple Pilots,
STP, right?
But he went back to STP after he was let go. So it wasn't like I'm leaving Velvet Revolver to go do STP.
Honestly, I don't think we all know how the story ends, and it's very tragic and it is very sad. But because of that, I don't think that Slash really had much of a choice. I don't think Slash and Duff and the other guys had much of a choice.
Well,
you kind of had to let him go.
So he left, right? He had obviously major demons to deal with. And what surprised me about Velvet Revolver was they actually talked about getting another singer. And they kind of went back and forth with it for a long time and kind of left it mysterious. But then that never happened. And then all of a sudden you see Slash's band with Miles Kennedy, which Miles Kennedy could have joined Velvet Revolver. And
easily.
I think
I don't know why
other members that were like, no, we don't want to do the same thing we just did.
Yeah.
And now they're all on stage touring with Axl again, so it doesn't matter anyway.
I guess Axl proved that he could. I think that Axl touring with AC/DC was partially proof to those guys, to the former members.
Oh, they'd already agreed to get back together when that happened. The tour dates had been announced. Yeah.
But they had only agreed to get back together for like 8 dates. I think it was like 8 or 12. I can't remember. The number was really small.
They got booked for the entire tour.
But they got booked all the way through, and they're still touring, if I understand it.
They're going to be touring probably until the money stops.
Yeah.
And
so if you think about it,
insane amount of money on the table.
They never have to walk into the studio again.
They will though someday.
But what Axl proved, because it's Axl and he's got to get his ego out. But
see, the thing is Axl, and I think he's the one that gets
stage and sing. What he wasn't doing when he was with them, that was their complaint. He wasn't showing up. He wasn't singing. He wasn't doing his thing. He wasn't being a professional. The studio stuff was fine. It was the live stuff that broke them up. If I remember the story right.
Let me give you the story as a person that saw them without the actual band. Okay. So I saw, and don't let anybody else tell you, because I've heard other people say the same shit and they weren't there. They didn't hear it. I heard it. When I saw him at the Allstate Arena. I think it would have been like 2000. I was still in high school, so it would have been like 2002 or 2003, right? Here in Chicago. And this show has gotten horrendous reviews everywhere. I have seen people in Facebook comments on, I went to that show, it was terrible. Because I said something about it.
The Guns N' Roses show?
It was not terrible. Those guys fucking destroyed that venue. The people that were actually there left with their jaws dropped because they couldn't believe how good it actually was.
You know why? You know who were making comments about that? Were people who got shitty audio from some jackass who was standing on the side
or didn't
behind
go and just are pissed because
with a cell phone.
No, see, here's what happens.
I saw some of that footage.
I know, but here's what happens with Guns N' Roses. That band has a bigger following than I think than anybody actually realizes, and there are people out there that are little fucking bitches who do the thing that, like when Paul Rodgers joined Queen. That's not Queen. Right. Freddie's dead. Queen's gone. Cry like a little bitch. Yeah. Listen. 3/4 of the band is still alive, you fucking dumbasses. Yes, right. I love Freddie. Freddie he is so close to my heart, but at the same time, it's like you can't tell these guys they can't go out and perform. Freddie would have wanted him to, you dipshit. And it's the same thing happens with Guns N' Roses, right? So Slash quit. He wasn't fired. He quit because they weren't making a rock record, right? So he quits, and really it's over a little bitchy thing about who played a solo on a particular record. Now,
and who was it they brought in? Gabe?
So they brought, I forget who the guy's name is, but it was a friend of Axl's, and as the story is told by Slash, a tape was recorded over that had one of Slash's solos for the End of Days soundtrack, right? And Slash did not know about it, right? Slash was on so much fucking heroin, he probably wouldn't have known if you'd punched him in the fucking face. Right. Okay? So,
and he has to admit that.
Yes, and he never has, as far as maybe behind the scenes, but never in an interview that, I kind of knew more about that than I let on. He's very good about being very cool in interviews and not being like, this is what really happened. We're talking about a guy that died twice on the Use Your Illusion tour and was brought back with paddles, okay?
Yep.
Because of heroin overdoses. The guy was extremely volatile to work with, whether you like it or not. But the problem I have with the people that still talk about Axl showing up late is that, number one, the way that bands used to perform, and they were trying to carry this through, and they were willing to pay the fines, were that they didn't take the stage till midnight.
Yeah. Because they didn't and the venues were like, no, you can't do that. We have a sound. We have to abide by a sound thing.
And he would tell them, "I'll pay the fees." Now the problem was the venues didn't tell people what was going on. So when you get a contract writer from a band that says we will not take the stage until 11:30 at night or 11 o'clock at night, and then they put out the ticket that says doors open at 8.
At 8, and people are standing around for 3 hours after they've heard two local bands and some shitty opening act.
Right. They're like, what the fuck?
If they got an opening act.
They're like, what the fuck? That being said, the hardcores would stay, and the hardcores know why you go. The other people do not. Now, the contract writers and stuff, and part of the way that Slash has been able to, or not Slash, Axl has been able to prove to the world that they can actually perform on time was they took Vegas dates. And they played 2 shows a night some nights. So they were doing it just to prove that they could be on stage every single night. And he did that with the band he had put together with Bumblefoot.
Buckethead?
No, it was Bumblefoot.
That was right.
Yeah, but the Buckethead band was pretty short-lived. I got to see him with Buckethead.
Did you?
That was the 2002 show. It was Buckethead, the guy from 9 Inch Nails. I'm trying to think who else is notable in the band. I think it was pretty much it. The guy that did the End of Days solo was there. I forget his name offhand. And it was an exceptional show that they put on. He could perform. I don't care. You may not like his fucking cornrows in that time period, but by God, that guy could sing. He could fucking sing notes that only dogs could hear. And it's just stupid how good he is. And then you sit there and you talk about, oh, he's a little bitch because he didn't show up on time. Listen, yes, big mistake. Should never have done that and been like, we're only going to go on stage. That's not consummate professional behavior. And it's one of those things where he should have taken those venues to task about not following the contract writer, if that in fact is the case, which I suspect it probably was. And then he has to, now he has to all this defamation of character and stuff that's happened over the years. If you read any of his interviews with like Rolling Stone and stuff about, him and his ex, I think it was his girlfriend that, claimed he was beating her and everything. And then all the stuff that this happened this past, the dude's got a lot of fucking problems and they stem from, his behavior as a child. He stays out of the media now. He doesn't want anything to do with him because every time he speaks, it's like, oh my God,
he twisted.
Everybody comes out of the woodwork to harass him. And, that's why I said, that's why so many people felt that the only real Guns N' Roses was Slash. Nothing to do with Axl at all. Slash was Guns N' Roses. No, he wasn't.
No,
who was writing the majority of the material? Who's got the guitar tone people actually remember from Appetites for Destruction? That was not Slash's guitar sound. He's got the thin nasally tone. And that's the thing that kills me is that everyone was waiting so long for them to reunite. And I'm like, why? I'd rather have the Gilby, I think it was Gilby Clarke was the guitar player on that record. I'd rather have him come back.
That's who I was talking about. Yeah.
I would have rather had him come back. So it's Guns N' Roses is a band that's extremely close to my heart. And so I feel like somebody's got to start setting the record straight for what these guys have done over the years. And this whole thing with they got back together because Axl could prove he could be on stage. No, they got back together because they were offered $30 million a show. It was fucking stupid. I think they said their first tour when they got back together was a $500 million tour. And it's to put that in perspective. That's Beatles money, people.
Yeah, and when you talked about the number of fans that they had, I can tell you that Slash was in an interview and he was talking about the amount of money they were making. And this was in the 90s. They were no, it was in the 2000s, early 2000s. Slash was talking about the fact that they were still selling enough copies. This is when albums are cut. Let me get to this. That when albums were still selling. They were selling enough copies of Appetite for Destruction that they were making $1 million a week on Appetite. That is 20 plus years after the release of the freaking album or so.
Is it 2 times Diamond now, I think?
Yeah, it's several times Diamond.
Yeah, I believe it's 2 times Diamond now, or possibly 3 at this point.
Yeah, which is what? Diamond is 20 million?
It's 10 million.
10 million. So you look at that, that's 20 million plus records. Look at the number of records they had to sell to make that kind of money. That is just phenomenal.
Let's look. Appetite for Destruction.
Yeah, Appetite for Destruction sales. So the point I'm making is, speaking of another band, very similar to me, the vocalist guitar player bands that's my thing. I love vocalist guitar player bands. Take the Rolling Stones. It is not the Rolling Stones without both Keith Richards and Mick Jagger. You can't have one without the other. When you look at AC/DC, that band was made up, and of course, people got pissed. Same thing when they had to replace the singer. Now he died, had to happen. But that band was Angus Young and, Brian Johnson through the 80s, right?
Yeah.
And in the beginning, Bon Scott. But it was always that two-person thing. To me, Led Zeppelin was made up of, I know that it couldn't happen without Bonham. But let me tell you, to me and to the faces of millions, that band was Jimmy Page and, come on. Now, why am I drawing a blank?
Probably because I'm looking at my screen, looking at the
Robert Plant
totals for that record and shitting myself.
Yeah, how many is it?
It's 2 times Diamond internationally. Yep. They sold 18 million copies in the U.S. alone.
Yeah.
And it's still selling.
You know who else is a 2 times diamond band of all the bands? The Dixie Chicks.
Yep.
Have a 2 times diamond. But anyway, so if you look at all these guitar Foreigner was another one I was surprised didn't show up on your supergroup thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Mick Jones came from Uriah Heep. So that was another one where I was like, oh, they mentioned all these ones that were, we never heard anything of, and Foreigner was huge. But anyway, that was another band. It was waiting. Yeah. You had Mick Jones up there with Lou Gramm. You had Journey was made up of Steve Perry playing off of hey, look, that's not the Foreigner that I'm thinking. Although
I was waiting for Journey to show up on the list.
Yeah.
Because I'm a dirty white boy.
Yeah. Journey and was, obviously Steve Perry and Neil Schon. So you can and so to people, you can't have, to me at least, it is not Guns N' Roses without both of those guys together. I mean, you can replace musically, you can replace people, but when it comes to what it meant,
if and here's where I'm going to break that train of thought. If Axl gets on stage with everybody but Slash from the original Guns N' Roses, that's still Guns N' Roses. But the problem was Axl fired everyone else.
Yes.
And then went out with the whole band. Yes, that's where the problem is. If he had left, if Gilby had come back and everybody, and he'd left everybody all original except for Slash, which he didn't. It's not like he fired Slash. Slash quit. Okay.
Yeah, I know.
That's the thing. I gotta keep hammering home. If Slash quits, that's still Guns N' Roses. When Steve Perry, not Steve Perry, what's his name? The guy from Aerosmith, Joe Perry. When Joe Perry quit Aerosmith, they didn't stop being Aerosmith.
Yeah,
they sucked, but they didn't stop being Aerosmith. They stopped being
Aerosmith. What was Joe Perry's freaking?
Oh, are you kidding me? He didn't even fucking play that shit anyway. They just kept bringing session players in to play over his parts.
What the hell was that? Let me tell you something. Joe Perry, probably half those records were session players. I'm sure.
I know.
As stoned as they were, You take these bands, how straight were they? When
I
they
know, right? That's why it took Guns N' Roses like 6 months to record Appetite for Destruction, because fucking Slash was so strung out all the time they couldn't even fucking get in the studio together. And that's the other thing is, like, when you watch we talk about these interviews, you see Axl do an interview and they're like, "Did you ever dabble in drugs?" And Axl's like, "Yeah." He's like, "I use drugs." He's like, "I'm incapable of being addicted." He's so full of shit. He's so full of shit. Number one,
addicted. Okay.
Either he was on drugs, or number two, he wouldn't touch them because he was terrified of them, because he's a very, very scared man. He lives his life being very frightened of a lot of things. And I would not be surprised at all to find out he's a complete straight edge, doesn't even drink. I mean, that's where I think he sits, but I don't know. So back to our supergroup discussion. So we talk about
we're coming up on our time.
I know, and I got one more thing to talk about.
All right, one more.
So I got to do my rant at the end here. Yes, we're going to be doing, for people who want to subscribe to our Patreon, I'm going to be doing David's Dumps, which is basically me, probably in front of a camera, with my microphone set up, just going off. I don't do it on the show as much as I'd like to, because I think the audience for the show is too wide for me to get really upset with certain things. But we're going to be doing this. I have one more band to bring up, and that's the Winery Dogs, and then we'll go into my first rant, just so that people can get a feel, a flavor of the turmoil of the turds.
What
You're gonna spew from my mouth. Okay.
Oh, the Winery Dogs. Oh my God. Okay,
Winery Dogs. John Sykes.
Richie Kotzen, right?
Well, he came in later. So it started out with John Sykes, Mike Portnoy, and Billy Sheehan, and then it became Richie Kotzen, Mike Portnoy, and Billy Sheehan. And they're a great band. Solid band. I highly recommend them. They're probably one of the few still functioning supergroups that are out there right now. I'm sure there are others, but they're one of the more well-known ones. Check them out. So anyway, so my first rant comes from, and I didn't think of a clever title. They will have clever titles, and they will have a little intro, and I will break them down in section by section basis so that we can.
Those who wonder where all of our clever titles come from, it's David.
They will. No, they don't all come from me, but I will focus in, will zero in on a topic and laser destroy it. Okay, so this week's rant from hell, David Dump, is let's talk about streams and being counted as sales of a particular song single. All right. So this came to my attention, and shame on me for not knowing this. I was watching an interview with Justin Hawkins of The Darkness, and they asked him, do you feel that you're successful, given that you've only really had one big hit record? And he said, well, we've gone gold in every record we've done. And then they're like, well, but you've never had the repeat success of Permission to Land. And then he says, well, it depends on how you define it. He said, I don't think anybody's getting platinum records anymore. And they go, well, the sales numbers say differently. And then that's when he says the sales numbers are bullshit, because he says if you're counting streams and streams as downloads or purchases of the music, then it's bullshit. And you know what? He's absolutely fucking right. I'm sorry, but the fact that we have an entire culture of people that are using Spotify and paying some stupid monthly fucking surcharge to go and download every piece of fucking music that comes across their brain is not the same thing as having to go to the store and plop down 10 to 15 bucks for a CD, take it home, and actually listen to every piece of trash that's on that album. Yes, we know about filler. There might be 3 songs on there you want, and the rest is filler. But you know what? That's how these people are lining their pockets and keeping the lights on. Some of these people can't even fucking. They wouldn't have a place to live. They'd be living with their parents if you didn't fucking buy the whole record. So now what have we done? We have taken away the commodity that is music, and we have made a culture of music where people can no longer profitably continue to produce art. That's a fucked up situation. And the bigger problem is that we have now made that a monetizable commodity. So the reason why downloads and streaming and calculating these numbers are important for business, because if you're Spotify and you want to have a bunch of fucking ads play in the middle of your thing, you need to know what songs are popular. But here's the real issue, why I have a rub with this. So imagine you're at work and you have Spotify, so you turn it on and you pick maybe one song and then let it decipher a playlist for you of all these other songs that they think you'd be interested in. Or you just turn it on and say random. And suddenly you've got a playlist from hell, complete with Katy Perry and all these other fucking crazy pop people who you will not know who wrote the song, who you will not know who performed on the song other than the vocalist, who you will not know who did all the auto-tuning and the pitch correction and the rhythmic adjustments. Yet, you're just going to let this stuff play. And you know what that means? That's money in these fucking people's pockets. You're giving them royalty checks by letting Muzak happen. Muzak, that stuff that just floats in the abyss around your ears, but not in it. You're not interested in it. You just want noise on. Well, I got news for you. Put a CD in your CD player. Use a fucking curated playlist, for Christ's sakes. No more random. Don't put music on for noise. Turn your TV on. Turn a fan on. For Christ's sakes, you don't need music to just give these people money. Stop paying the Katy Perrys of this world. It needs to stop. Britney Spears doesn't need your money. Whatever fucking pop act doesn't need your money. You know, and it infuriates the shit out of me that people don't seem to understand by just letting shit happen like that passively. You're rewarding shit art. Stop it. Stop it. I'm done. Tapping out.
I like that. And with that, I have been Jim.
And I have been David.
And we have been
Shitty Practical Guitarists.